Namaste and welcome to today's 7 p.m. show. And we have a great luminary today, ex-Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal ji is with us. Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me again.
And we are struck by this second wave of COVID. And definitely we are in a bit of a bind. But many other countries have also been struck by COVID too, the second wave. And we find that suddenly the great purveyor of Western liberalism and Western universalism, and you know better than anybody else what I am referring to, universalism within quotes. They are now suddenly at India's back, and they are trying to teach us all the Western values, which we seem to have forgotten, according to them. And they are even not sparing us with our funeral pyres, and with the subtext, of course, that same thing that the British colonizers said, that, okay, these are barbarians with a beastly religion. Do you think that is the subtext to what all is actually pouring in from the West? Or
I think it's a mixture of two things. One is that they have always wondered how is it that India, with such a large population and a poor healthcare system, has been spared the ravages of the pandemic until now, of the kind that the Western countries suffered, the United States, France, UK, Italy, Spain. In fact, all the advanced economies of the West have suffered grievously. And there have been shocking cases of deaths, rows of coffins in Italy, for example. And if you look at the figures that are there on the ground about the number of deaths in the United States or in UK or in France or elsewhere, and if you compare them to deaths in India and take into account the population differences, the gaps are really, really huge, both in terms of the number of infections and the number of deaths. So there has always been this feeling that India has somehow escaped. And now, and you would recall that some of our own channels and some of our own people have been interviewing the epidemiologists from the United States, Indian origin fellows, who have been, based on some mathematical modeling, projecting millions and millions of infections, a few millions of deaths, and this was being tom-tommed about on some of our digital channels. And when sort of nothing happened, there must have been a sense of disappointment in many quarters that this was the case. And now, when the pandemic has struck in a vicious way, and certainly the scenes that are being projected are pretty harrowing. And now, for the first time, people of a certain class, the upper middle class, the middle class, they are being affected, visibly affected. Some of my own retired colleagues in the Indian Foreign Service have been affected and have passed away because of shortage of oxygen. So therefore now they want to believe that whatever their predictions were right. And then the narrative is that the Indian government became complacent and didn't take adequate precautions to prepare for the second wave, which some people were saying is bound to come. They didn't learn from the lessons of other countries and are responsible for the lack of preparedness, which we see now. But behind this, there's another element, in addition to what you said about white supremacism and everything else, and I'll come to that. That is that they feel that Modi has become vulnerable. And they must push the point and lay the entire blame on the Prime Minister himself. Which is why they talk about his rallies in West Bengal as if Mamata Banerjee and nobody else did rallies. Modi did rallies in Kerala or Tamil Nadu or elsewhere. And they only talk about the Kumbh Mela because that becomes kind of a poster thing to show how backward this Hinduism thing is with the superstition beliefs that they can bathe in the holy Ganges and then COVID will disappear. And then they absolutely never mention that the thing began in Maharashtra, that there were no elections there, there were no Kumbh Melas there, or in Delhi there have been no elections and no Kumbh Melas. It's not a question of looking for excuses about what has happened. It's just to take an objective view that the second wave has been very vicious. It is true that the population became complacent, and not only the government. And the impact of the virus has been disastrous in terms of the number of people who've been affected, and has put so much pressure on our health system, including oxygen supplies, that we've had these terrible, terrible scenes in hospitals and people dying for lack of oxygen. This makes a very good story. And now I want to come to the second point, that I wouldn't like to blame entirely the Western press for this. I would blame far more our own people. I mean, you have our people going to the Shamshan Ghats, the nation grounds, and they're sitting there and photographing this. And this, of course, for the Western press, is manna from heaven when they want to demean India. And then they show these cremation fires burning as if they are, as I said in one of my tweets, the stars sprinkling in heaven. You know, the kind of aerial photographs we do of this, without any regard for the sense for privacy. Those people who have died as if it is a tamasha, that real human tragedy is involved. So show some human sentiments, but no, repeatedly. And it's not only, frankly, it's not only the Western channels. I was a bit unhappy that even RT, which is a Russian state-owned channel, has been doing the same thing. Because let me tell you, when I was serving in Nepal, Western tourists who were visiting Nepal had in their tourist itinerary a visit to the Bagmati River because they burned their bodies on the banks of the Bagmati. This was part of the tourist circuit, as it is the case of Varanasi. So there is this kind of obscene fascination in the West with cremation, and I don't understand why. How burying people in the ground is less of a what should I say, is more acceptable than burning bodies. But this is a pagan custom, you see, which predates Christianity and monotheistic religions who bury their dead and stuff like that. But it is our own people who have created this narrative because they have wanted to extract the last juice from this tragedy in terms of damaging Modi and his government and putting on the back foot and playing this up internationally. So this is it. So it's a combination, to answer your question, it's a combination both of some ingrained Western thinking about India as a kind of a country that still needs to be redeemed and become fully civilized, though I wouldn't like to go to the extent of saying that all Westerners think like that. But there is a segment that think like that. And all this has got reinforced by the contribution of our own people and our own writers and our own, like Arundhati Roy and our own journalists and everything else, who are playing upon this theme incessantly, and it continues.
Quite right. And in this context, of course, the entire human rights lobby these days, it seems to be directing itself more to some kind of a soft regime change exercise than having some genuine empathy for the India, for the Indians and for India.
Well, if you look at this regime change angle, if you look at it from this regime change angle, look, I'm not a party person, so it's not as if I'm a BJP chair and I'm anti-Congress. There's nothing of the kind. But purely as somebody who's been in the foreign service, served this country for 40 years, and from the time I first landed in Paris in 1968, and I was in charge of the publicity wing, the information wing of the embassy, I had to cope with Louis Malle's The City of Joy. It was a terrible series which was banned in India on conditions of poverty in India, especially in Calcutta, with people dying in the streets. And whenever I've served in Western country, I have found this to be a problem. The press is very negative. It will talk about all the things. It will always talk about. It will always have a negative view of India, and from the time when I first joined the service, it was that India's population was going to increase, and it was going to put a lot of pressure on the resources of the world. You know that that group of Rome or whatever it was called at that time. They were very wondering how the world is going to sustain such a large population, and India was very much in the focus. And population control was the theme, and then poverty was the theme, and then we are unable to feed ourselves. That was the theme. Today, the theme is that right-wing Hindutva, fascist government, anti-Muslim, anti-minority, and everything else that I have seen. So, in all my years in the service, but limited to the Western countries and Anglo-Saxon countries, not really, I won't say all Western countries like that. Anglo-Saxon countries, this has been a recurrent theme. And this is now, once again, something that we are coping with. And since today, the obsession is with Hindutva and right-wing government and anti-Muslim and anti-minority and what have you, there is a combined move by opposition elements here in India and those circles in the West who associate fascism with Nazism, and when we use words like genocide and Kristallnacht and Mussolini and what have you, it rings a very ominous bell in their minds. And since this is a chorus coming from India, they get influenced by it, and the people who are behind this are not people who are nobody. They have an international face. They have some credibility, wrongly or rightly, in terms of Western public opinion. And when they find these people saying these things, and to their relatively ignorant and uneducated minds, and they don't probe deeper into this thing, they're carried away and they say, there must be some truth in this. Otherwise, why should responsible people say this? Why should Rahul Gandhi, for example, tell Nick Burns that, why don't you say something about democracy in India? As if Americans are going to say about democracy when they're hands full in saving their own democracy. If you look at Biden's inaugural speech and his recent State of the Union, they have a much bigger problem in handling their democracy than we have. But there it is. So our opposition elements think that Modi has been badly hit by this COVID. His reputation, the Modi government is in tatters. And while regime change is sort of a big thing, it doesn't occur overnight unless you have, like in the case of the Arab Spring, uncontrollable street demonstrations. Regime change are not going to occur. And also, to be fair and honest, I mean, one shouldn't also be carried away by Western phobia. That regime change occurred because the democratic institutions and the democratic bodies linked to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, which are in the business of promoting democracy globally and financing these street agitations like in Ukraine. They're not doing anything of the kind in India, so let's also not get paranoid. But nevertheless,
Okay.
there is this hope here that somehow if Modi can be destabilized, then maybe they have a chance that in 2024 something else may happen. Or make the Modi governance so difficult that the public opinion gets more and more alienated and opens up political space for her. That is the game that is being played, and which, unfortunately, our journalists, some of our academics, some of our columnists are playing merry hell as much as they can.
Quite right. And in the midst of all this, we have not just those gory pictures that you referred to. We also have people like Arundhati Roy, starting off with the exactly like the West, I should say, the Abrahamic dogma where word is supreme, and then they say that, okay, read this remarkable Arundhati Roy essay and rage and weep for an India misgoverned by a neo-fascist narcissist. Okay, so they will never say this about anybody, any chief minister, whereas they have been saying this for the chief minister of Gujarat for almost 13 years till he became prime minister. Then they shifted to the prime minister. So this whole thing about neo-fascism and narcissism, this seems to come all too easy for these, or should I say, these pedagogues who masquerade as journalists.
Well, Arundhati Roy writes well, and her book, God of Small Things, catapulted her to international fame. So now she is profiting from that as much as she can, and she's become a pamphleteer or a polemicist who writes on all sorts of issues. But because of her reputation and the fact that she's quite she writes well, and so she has a considerable audience. But what surprises me is, frankly, is that can't the people who admire her like this loose character sitting in Washington, can't they see that a person who's got such visceral hatred for someone, can that person be really objective? Can't they see that the venom coming out from her writings, which are full of distortions and misleading facts? Now, for example, in her article that she wrote, one thing that struck me is that she said very glibly that the RSS has armed militias, because the connection is with the Nazi militias.
Okay.
So the point is that
I wish they had. Then they would have probably resisted the West Bengal violence much better.
But this is ridiculous. Armed militias. This rings a certain bell in the minds of those who suffered under the Nazis,
Right.
stormtroopers or whatever they are. And there are so many other totally factual errors and distortions in an article. But I'm talking about the larger point that have the people in the West, the journalists and others who so-called India specialists, have they lost all sense of proportion? Can't they distinguish fact from fiction, from their experience in India, even if they have prejudices against us, and understand that what is being written is gross. It is terribly prejudiced. It's hugely biased. This comes out so clearly from the text. But the point is that they share the same thinking, and that's why when circulating this article on Twitter, this loose fellow calls Modi, says that this tragedy India is being governed by neo-fascist narcissists. Now, to talk of a foreign, after all, okay, there may be people unhappy with Modi in India. What has poor Modi done to these fellows? Has he invaded any bloody country? Has he caused the flow of refugees into Europe or United States of America? How many Muslims has he killed as a result of direct orders from him and asking his army to go and decimate them? Has he brought about any regime change in any country? Even if we are a democracy, has he gone ahead and fought and crusaded for democracy, even in our neighborhood, which is far more vulnerable and could be put under pressure? It is ridiculous. Now the other article, the other cartoon which I saw, to which I reacted strongly, was in the Australian, where they show a collapsed elephant, and the mahout on top is Modi. And it just shows such disrespect for a country and a leader. Leave aside Modi himself. There is India beyond Modi, and you have to respect a country also. And maybe I said it on my Twitter, or otherwise I've certainly said it, that it will be like if, since they're very unhappy with Bolsonaro, they should show Bolsonaro tied to a cross overlooking Rio, but laughing away instead of Christ the Savior, or the vultures sort of sitting around an emaciated Uncle Sam, who's lying over the dead bodies of blacks in the United States, or Johnson, because we had so many deaths in the UK, sitting atop an emaciated lion, a collapsed lion with a crown on his head, which is askew. I mean, they never do this. They never do this. In our own constitution, freedom of expression, Article 19, if you read it, there is a clause which talks about restrictions which relate to friendly relations between countries, between nations. So there is a limit to this kind of freedom of expression. So if you want to show sympathy and concern and even a degree of pity for the suffering population of India, you can't go ahead and publish such a totally derogatory is a very mild word. It's such a vicious cartoons against a country holding the leader of that country, a popularly elected leader country, faced with a pandemic which other countries have not equally been able to cope effectively, as being responsible for the death of the country.
Okay, that's right. Okay, this is the second tweet in your exchange with Edward Luce. Yeah, that is this one. And of course, there's the other one, which I'll try and put up, in which actually you refer to all the things that we missed out, including, this is the one that is coming up. The crimes by Britain in India for 2 centuries. Rising India that treats people like him as irrelevant troubles him. Actually, this is very important, and you say that a lot of these people, they find themselves having become irrelevant, and they actually take it out on them, because that basic thing that the West brought civilization to India, that essential Christian doctrine of civilizing mission and of discovery. So they discovered India, and because of that discovery doctrine that we have, they got the right to civilize us, and they got the right to appropriate whatever we had, including all the knowledge. And we know how that knowledge was appropriated and recycled. I think that psyche seems to be at work.
Yes, you're right. Look, since I've served in so many countries abroad, including in some Western countries, one should differentiate from a certain category of people. In the think tank circles, especially in media circles, think tank circles, policy-making circles, there are some innate prejudices against India, which go back from the time of our independence. And this is true of Britain and United States in particular, because we were the ones that began the unraveling of the British Empire as a whole. And while they had to accept this reality, but at the back of the mind, some people, there always is this feeling that they lost India. And then we adopted many of the institutions of the West, including, of course, the English language. So that gave them 2 things. One, that they could then judge the way we were handling the institutions they had bequeathed to us. And the English language gave them very easy, constant access to our policymakers at all levels, and to our opinion makers. And our policymakers and opinion makers for a long time. And even now that feeling is not entirely wiped out. They look for validation from these people from whom they inherited all that they think is prizeworthy in terms of uh, themselves, their intellectual setup, their families, institutions, and everything else. So the yardstick always in terms of measuring our failures is what the Western standards would be, without looking at the fact that those standards are never lived up to. But leave that aside. Now that when there is a churning up in India, a real democratic churning up in India, with the rise of the BJP and a class of rulers, politicians, and others who are different, who are not very largely comfortable with English, who are very deeply rooted in their own traditions, in their own religion, and therefore have a personality of their own and a thinking of their own. And because they are not English speaking, they can't relate to them. So what do? So they keep in touch with all those English speaking elites. Frankly, you and I are part of that. But in some senses, we are also not part of that. So their only point of contact left is these fellows who have been ousted from their positions of power and privilege and everything else that they had for so many decades. And all the bitterness that those people displaced from power in India have is then transmitted to these fellows with whom they are in touch, and they share this. And therefore a common vocabulary gets developed. Therefore a neo-fascist, narcissist, this and that. Our own people started saying that. It's not as if, to be honest, it's not as if they invented this vocabulary. They just picked up the vocabulary from our own people. I don't know if it is right to mention names or whatever else, but people like Shashi Tharoor, he's very adept at this. So this is how it is.
Yes, I keep watching you take a lot of pot shots at Shashi Tharoor.
Because I tell you why. I've been very good friends with him. Okay. He had my hospitality here and there. So it's not that. It's just that I can't understand that a man like him should have views like this. Which just doesn't make sense. There's a room for objectivity. Even if you have a different political point of view, there is room for objectivity. And he just mudslings and wants to attack Modi and his government for any and every reason that he can find, and reasons which actually don't hold water, have no substance in them. So a man of such intellect who has written so many books, who writes so well, that he should express himself in the way he does politically surprises me. And therefore I feel obliged to rebut him, that's all. Otherwise I have nothing personal against him at all.
Yes, and the best, of course, is that he's from Kerala. He's a member of parliament from Kerala, where his party lost very unusually, because there is a change of guard every 5 years in Kerala. For the last 44 years, the tradition was there. And having lost Kerala, he actually takes a jibe at BJP for having lost Bengal, where it was never in power. So,
yes.
I think
Well, I've said that in my
classic mudslinging.
I've said that in my tweet that he thinks that Mamata Banerjee defeating BJP is a victory for the Congress, even though Congress got zero seats. How can you you should worry more about the debacle of your own party rather than the fact that the BJP has been defeated. But there it is. And it's not only him. There are some other Congress leaders that I see with whom I have good personal relationship. I hold myself back, but they're also saying the same kind of things. And the other person who I find deplorable in terms of the manner in which he hits at the Modi government is this Pratap Bhanu Mehta. You see, the other thing is this. The other thing is this, that our own press Apart from, okay, it's perfectly fine, freedom of the press, they can write what they want. I may disagree, but I don't fundamentally disagree with giving them space to express themselves. And then others have a right to rebut what they say. That's the one aspect. The other is that they invite foreigners to write in our newspapers about India and vilifying the government and this includes NRIs, PIOs who settled abroad from the comfort of their places in the US or Britain or whatever. They pontificate about India as if they are living the day-to-day reality in India and totally plugged in into what is happening and fully understand. Even people like you and me, I don't know about you, people like me don't fully understand the Indian reality sitting in India because it's so complex, but these people will pontificate as if they have answers for everything. So our papers give them constantly space as if we need learning lessons from them about our own politics, about our own sociology. So this kind of constantly seeking validation from either genuine Westerners or quasi-Westerners of PIO origin surprises me.
Yes, you're talking about validation. I think lately the government in the MEA has been coming out with strong statements. And actually been telling them that we do not seek your approval anymore. And we have our own understanding of the situation, and we do not need sermons and homilies from you. And we are no longer in the habit of seeking approval from you. So that is something that I think our colonized elite finds most offensive. And then they actually start attacking these kind of narratives as if they have been offended personally. What is this kind of psychology?
See, I'm glad that the external affairs minister said that. But at the end of the day, this is a defensive reaction. It is unfortunately not a national reaction. National in the sense when the country as a whole thinks like that. But when you have sizable parts of our political establishment and an intellectual and an academic establishment and a press and a journalistic establishment who actually are very happy when these homilies are given and actually give space to them to give us these homilies, then, it's not surprising that when the external affairs minister says something sensible, this is not supported by others who then attack him or criticize him. So it's unfortunate that this is so. But then India is not easy to govern. Sometimes I wonder why prime ministers and take on the responsibility of governing 1.3 billion people with problems everywhere.
And what would be your suggestion to the best way to both short term and long term, the best way to tackle these kind of poisonous narratives emanating
Not easy.
from the West?
Not easy because, as I said, I joined the service in 1966. My first posting was in 1968 to France. And I've grappled with this. And I say to many people that, I have that, not perhaps everybody has that, but I have been trained right from the start to defend our country because I've seen our country under attack during so many phases of our national life. And much of this criticism is not valid. It is prejudiced. And there are many forces behind it. So having constantly defended our country, my mindset is to defend our country against these uninformed, vicious attacks that we are facing. But this will not go away. So to answer your question, at the end of the day, what will get us out of this situation is economic rise, economic prosperity, increasing wealth, higher standards of living, more At the end, more power, more military power, and more self-sufficiency. Once we go down that road, it can't be achieved overnight, but we are down that road. It will take some more time. Once we go down that trajectory, then many things won't go away. They won't go away, but there will be a little caution in dealing with India in the manner in which they are doing now. Why I'm saying this is that America is the most powerful country in the world with huge economic and military strength. But America doesn't get a good press everywhere, even in Europe, even amongst its allies, because they see what is happening in America, the racism and everything else, and they comment on it. Europe is again, if you take the European Union, the largest economy in the world with major powers. But look at the reputation of Europe today. Or beyond that, look at the whole crisis of democracy that we are talking about. And this crisis of democracy is being most felt and noted in the established democracies of the West. And this is creating a great degree of demoralization in many parts of the world because they see against this an authoritarian China, which is rising and presenting a totally different inhuman model. So, to be realistic, we shouldn't wait for a time when there will be no criticism. But what we need is more self-confidence, in genuine self-confidence in ignoring this criticism and going down our path and doing what we want. That is the answer.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you refer to China, because China is actually a product of the capitalist Americas and
Yes,
the corporate America's greed, actually.
Absolutely. I've been saying that for such a long time, and now they're howling because China is now become a genuine competitor. But they built China, and because not only them, Japan has built China, Europe has built China, and even Taiwan has built China. So, because they all went in the wake of the United States of America. And they overlooked totally the gross human rights violations in China, which they continue to do now. And they created a fiction that as China become more prosperous, will become more democratic. This was to justify why they were dealing with a communist country. Because the whole the logic of the Cold War was capitalism versus communism, right? But the opening towards China came much earlier, during the Cold War. But how could they justify it? But anyway, later on, Clinton and all had this, created this illusion in order to justify American capital in strengthening the Communist Party of China. And now the sins have come to roost, if you like, to use that phrase. So there it is. And even now, they are targeting equally, if not more, on Russia still, because they can't disentangle themselves from China economically. So then they have this formula: with cooperation, confrontation, competition. This is just a formula to cover up their continuing economic relationship with China. This is exactly what China wants. They want competition, they want cooperation, and they don't mind the confrontation because they think they have a stronger hand. So I'm not too sure if the West has learned the lessons, or if they'll be able to implement the lessons they've learned on the ground effectively enough. And that's the problem for countries like ours.
Yes, I think you mentioned it today. I was looking at your timeline, and you mentioned about this mad preoccupation with Russia, and actually pushing Russia into China's lap all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the funny part is that, these are people who got such a plethora of think tanks and great expertise. One shouldn't minimize that. And some of the people have worked their entire life on certain issues, so the depth of knowledge that they have is very considerable. But when it comes to a commonsensical view of doing things where you don't need years of study, just the common sense will tell you what you should do. They go absolutely wrong on geopolitics. I mean, why are they treating Russia with 142, 145 million population, a dwindling population, with a economy that is not doing well, with manufacturing that has, after all, the great strength of the Soviet Union was its industry. But look at the manufacturing in Russia today. And then continuing pushing NATO, continuing pushing the European Union right into the borderlands of Russia, and then not expect Russia to react. And if Russia reacts, then it is Russia's fault. The other thing is that I'm surprised that they have so little confidence in their own democracies and the will of the people, that Russia can interfere in the practice of their democracy and cause a problem in their elections. I mean, it just doesn't make common sense. And that is the ground for slapping sanctions left, right, and center on Russia, leaving Russia no choice but to go more and more into the arms of China. And then it has direct impact on our own security because of our past relationship with Russia and the need for us to keep Russia on our side. But the moment Russia becomes more and more dependent on China, Russia can at best be neutral, but nothing more, which is not very, very helpful. So Russia has become a kind of a junior partner of China, which doesn't help us. In a sense, the West has still not learned the obvious lesson from this. They need to detach Russia, or begin the process of detaching Russia from China, but giving some space to Russia, not to push it so much that they are constantly worried about security. And now, of course, wanting to bring Ukraine and NATO once again, and Georgia once again into NATO, and creating fresh problems and interfering in Belarus, which is an absolute no-go for Russia security. But there it is.
Yes, quite right. And they keep doing that, and they keep irritating the allies also, like these freedom of navigation operations near Lakshadweep and in South Korea. That's absolutely unnecessary. I would say that even a junior most diplomat would not commit such a blunder. But the mighties, they do.
Yeah, but here, this is an old story with India, so it's not new. So it just is that this time when the U.S. 7th Fleet issued that release that was worded so atrociously and so aggressively against India, and actually what they're doing is wrong, but blaming India for excessive maritime claims, and without any thought about Indo-Pacific and the Quad and everything else. It was a gross error. I think they've learned from it. But this FONOPS business will continue. They won't give up, because that is their very strongly entrenched position, because they are the only country in the world which has a all ocean-going navy. They can intervene anytime, at any part of the globe. There are 11 carrier groups. So they want to have total freedom of navigation and don't want to ask anybody's permission to do what they like. That is the aspect of US power, and India is part of that equation. So beyond a certain point, they're not going to worry about India's sensitivities on this score. They have a consistent position in this regard.
Yes, that's okay. That was known. The problem only was that statement, which they have never issued in the past. India had also never objected to their FONOPS.
No, as Foreign Secretary also I dealt with it, but it was handled very quietly. We issued a diplomatic note, and that is it. There was no point in making it public and humiliating India as a friend, as a partner. And at a time when the navies of the two countries are really collaborating with each other. But I think they may not do it again. They may do FONOPS, but they may not make it public.
Yes. Actually, the U.S. State Department, you dealt with it long enough, that they have all shades of people. So I think that also creates the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, sir, thank you very much. Now we have a few audience questions, a couple. We'll just take them. Before that, I have to request all the viewers to please like this video, share it around, and of course, subscribe to the channel if you will, and help us and support us. Next questions. Sahil Gupta. So your take on the Serum Institute owners moving to UK? Fraud. They haven't really moved to UK.
I personally think, and I have commented on that, is that it was immature on the part of Poonawalla to have given this interview in Financial Times. And that to Martin Fletcher, who incidentally has had a knife into Johnson for a very long time. So that aspect is also there. And what's the point in raising issues to which he doesn't himself give clear answers and leaves it in the air so that everybody speculates as to who were the people who were threatening him, who were the chief ministers, who were the people in power. The fellow has got it going so well in India. It's the biggest vaccine producing company in the world, and its products are needed so desperately in India. His entire focus should be on India, and if he's been subject to such pressure, he should show more grit. He's indispensable. He should show more grit, and not give these loose interviews with lots of threads hanging in the air, and give the impression that he has run away, which certainly he hasn't. And also, the fact is that when the country is under stress, why is he creating more stress in this delicate situation by raising questions of the kind that he has raised, and show that he himself is not capable of undergoing stress? I think on so many counts, this whole interview was wrong. But since then, he has said that he's coming back to India, as he must, because his bread and butter is in India, and the SSI services are needed in India. So it's an unfortunate thing, but I think we will overcome this, and I hope that he has learned his lesson a little bit, that you should be careful when you make such public statements on issues on which the fallout of which is not under your control.
Okay. Next one. Mandar Karnik, what is an effective counter for the negative bias of Anglo-Saxon nations? Why is there always the talk of Pakistan buying positive coverage in foreign press and we do not?
Well, that's a bit exaggerated. Well, first of all, insofar as the effective counter for the negative bias of the Anglo-Saxon nations, I would say that I answered the question in our initial discussion, that the answer lies in ourselves becoming more self-reliant, less dependent on others, having increasing levels of self-confidence as a nation, have this feeling that we are able to have a grip on our own problems and resolve them. It doesn't mean that we don't we move away from the rest of the world, or we don't integrate with others. That's part of our building up our international profile. We can't build our profile alone, but we should do it from a position of confidence and strength, as we've been doing. And as we grow and prosper and are able to manage our problems, and visibly so, all the problems won't go away, as I mentioned in our initial conversation, the kind of problems that are plaguing the United States and Europe itself, and the bitterness in their own public opinion against their own governments when they talk about the crisis of democracy. What is it? It's crisis of democracy means they're not happy with their own governance. So some of these problems will not go away, but the effective counter is our growing economic strength and our political self-confidence, and many elements in the Anglo-Saxon world. In fact, we'll find other reasons to target India as India becomes stronger.
Oh yes, oh yes, yes.
Because then we will eat
bias will
into
always be there,
their
and
sphere of influence. We will be relatively reducing their power in the international system. We'll be able to actually impose our ideas on international governance and have more say in international governance. So the challenge of power, we will then be raising the challenge, real challenge of power, which currently we are not raising. And all the studies are showing that by 2040, 2050, we'll be the second largest economy in the world. And before that, by 2030 or whatever, we'll be the third largest economy. So they'll have more reasons than to pressure us on this point or on that point. So that, and then they look at our weakness, and they actually may promote some problems in our neighborhood in order to keep us under control. So we have to live with that reality. But with regard to Pakistan buying positive coverage, frankly, no. Pakistan is really looked upon as a virtually failed state. The only thing is that some countries are fearful that this mad country, which is ruled by mullahs now, you've seen what's happened with the TLP, bringing both the army and the civilian government down to heel, that these guys have nuclear weapons and they may do all sorts of things. No. Pakistan has no good press coverage. What actually seems to bother the person who asked the question, which is not wrong, is that when it comes to issues, India-Pakistan issues or Kashmir and everything else, we get a bad press and they don't expose Pakistan as much as they should. But that is part of a different kind of diplomatic game that is being played. It's not because of Pakistan's inherent strength, it's because of the prejudices against India.
Well, that's more because they don't even count Pakistan as anything important.
No. Do you know that in Britain, for example, now, they have delinked India and Pakistan in their foreign office divisions. Pakistan is no longer in the South Asia division. So.
Okay. Rakesh Ori, he's from Canada. So he says in Punjabi we say, Jidi kothi dane ode kamle visyane. If a family is rich, then even its stupid members are wise. That is why a mere opinion of the most misinformed Westerner carries weight.
Yes and no. It carries weight because our own people are, as I said earlier, are actually giving totally unnecessary importance to what an odd person like Luz or somebody else says. It is our inferiority complex. And the issue is that this inferiority complex and this desire to bring others into India to solve our problems or put pressure on our own government, it is what we see it at very responsible or irresponsible levels, if you like. So it's actually, we are giving way to these fellows. Now, I've seen and I've said that in so many conversations, that Freedom House publishes something. And the editorials, there are huge columns, huge write-ups in all our newspapers. And the other day, there was something with the UN-affiliated organization about the happiness index. And there again, we gave so much publicity to it. So anything negative that is said, or freedom of expression or this or that, rankings are done, our papers play it up. And occasionally, as I said, editorials appear. So it's not that a mere opinion of a most misinformed Westerners carry weight. It is that our own totally misinformed and misguided people give too much weight to these people and organizations outside. It's our fault.
Okay. So I think, is that the last question? Okay, that was the last question. So thank you very much, sir, for enlightening us. Okay, there's one more, the last minute one. Okay, the government elected by absolute majority, how it can be called death of democracy? How can they be allowed to peddle such stories? Can't they be discarded for fake news?
No, I think it's more than that. Of course, it is true that government has been elected by a whopping majority in parliament. But as I said somewhere, actually, government has been, I'm talking the Modi government, has had to work very hard to get democratic acceptance all the time. What are the elections in the states for? Modi and his government are trying to win democratic acceptance, and they're not getting it fully. They lost relatively in West Bengal, although done very well in terms of where they started from. But in Tamil Nadu, they've not done well. In Kerala, they've not done well. They've not yet got that kind of democratic acceptance. So democracy is very much alive in India. Where is the death of democracy? And the people who are shouting most about the death of democracy are the ones who are abusing the Modi government publicly the most. So there is such a total contradiction between what they say and the reality, where they are allowed to peddle whatever they want to say. And they talk about the Godi media. Frankly, I feel sometimes very upset when I see all kinds of abuse being hurled on television channels and in our press against Modi personally and his government. It is all being allowed. So this narrative of death of democracy is absolutely foolish. In fact, we have got too much democracy, if you ask me.
Yes, it's too much democracy. Is right. I think it's almost a license that instead of being a democracy. So thank you very much. Thank you all viewers. We sign off in this note. Jai Hind.
Thank you.
Vande Mataram.
Thank you. Thank you.